Mario,
No, long time no see, eh?
I know. Didn't work out so far this week,
Okay.
but I'm back for a while.
Hmm?
I'm back for a while.
Where were you?
No, just crazy things were
Oh,
happening at
oh,
night.
oh, oh, I thought you
I
were in
wasn't going
Hong Kong
anywhere.
again for 2 days.
Yeah, yep. What page are we on? 321.
319 at the very top where it says Rav Moshe Feinstein.
You mean 321?
319.
319. Where's what you find stuff?
On the comment, on the pink part, at the very top. Moshe Feinstein writes similarly regarding the definition of something which is called
That's
substantially.
on 321 in my book.
Oh, you have a different book.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm surprised. Wow.
I don't think they make two printings on this.
No, but you may, I don't know, doesn't make sense.
We're not doing ATM. That's right here. To pick up. He's
Is this
picking up.
mine?
It's 17.
17?
It's 17.
Which is less than 30.
Yeah, it's actually a good deal in our group.
319 at the very top. The Moshe Feinstein.
Mhm. This is the issue of bishul achar bishul. That means if you cooked something already, and by the way, we're only getting a part view of this. It's going to become clearer when we talk about like chazara. You know, the problem with bishul is there's so many aspects to it. There's bishul, but then there's this thing where if you've got something already in an oven or on a stove and you take it off, how can you replace it? And so they've discussed a little bit. Before we do Rav Moshe, let's do the Chazon Ish again. Actually, let's look at 318. The Ramah quotes the view permitting reheating liquids that have been fully cooked. Now, we're talking about like soup. Remember, the eglay tal is a very important eglay tal, which about water. See, water, once you cook water and then you cool it down, so you haven't changed the water. So that it's the eglay tal wanted to say that is going to be prohibited. It's because you heated the what? But for example, let's say you cook chicken soup, right? It's been heated up. So it's already been cooked. Yeah, you may not want to eat it cold. You may want to warm it up to be lukewarm. But there's the Ramos permits reheating that liquids. He notes that the prevailing custom is to be lenient in this regard, as long as the liquid is not cooled down completely, i.e., put in the refrigerator, right? Says the Shulchan Aruch, Dovish is bashbel kol tzorcho, something that's been cooked completely, right? Michael ben Drustoy, we talked about, is what a robber would cook. He's running around so quick, he can't wait for his food to cook completely. So we established, according to most poskim, it's either a third cooked or a half cooked. But the Shulchan Aruch says it's got to be cooked completely. V'hu yavesh, we're talking about it's not liquid, so it's a dover gush. It's like a piece of meat or a piece of kugel. right? She'ein bo marak, there's no gravy, right? No liquid. Muchula nicho keneged madura. So you can't put it on top of a fire, but you could put it next to a fire. That's the concept of a blech, where we have a fire, but you put a metal on it. So that would be considered putting it next to a madura. Afil b'makam shayat soledisbo, even though that madura is hot as whatever we define yat soledisbo, let's say 114 degrees. Says the Ramah, va'afilu nitztanin kvar. It is cool. If it's still hot and it's still liquid, then it's not a problem. If you don't put it directly on the fire, just next to it, even if it was already cold, it's mutter. Like cool, the way the Ramah is learning, it means like room temperature, but it's not in the gamre would be a problem. Now the Chazon Ish,
This is for food that has some liquid in it. That's what he's talking about.
the Ramah, he extended. The Shulchan Aruch said no liquid,
He said,
and the Ramah is extending even to a little bit of liquid. The Chazon Ish explains the rationale behind this practice. In principle, we accept the lenient position that bishul achar bishul is not cooking, even when the foods have cooled fully. The stringency regarding such liquids was adopted, as a gzeira, right, to avoid confusing uncooked liquids with cooked liquids that have cooled down, or due to the rabbinic prohibition of returning cooked food to the fire. That's what we talked about, this chazara business. Hinei Meikar Adin, from the basic law, says the Chazon Ish, ain't shum mokum lachalei bein nitztanin legamri lo nitztanin legamri. This cool down completely or not, it's really no point in that. The kol she'ena yad soledes b'choshev adin ketzoynei. As long as the food is under 114 degrees, if it's not yad soledes, that's considered tzonei. It's either it's all or none. You're pregnant, you're not pregnant. You're yad soledes or not. That's what the Chazon Ish is saying. As long as something's been cooked, there's no bishul achar bishul, so you haven't committed an isser. That was according to the Rambam, the Rajba, and the Ran. Ella. So now he tells us why we can't do it. Mipnei shelo yavo lahakel b'chai. Shouldn't say b'chayim, b'cham. So we are in a, because we don't do it b'cold. She'en chamimus nikeres. We're not sure what really the temperature of this is. V'efshar duhu mishum gerer chazara. Then he says maybe the reason why we don't put the liquid back on, it's because of the issue of taking something off an oven and putting it back on. Okay. This is where Rav Moshe comes in. Rav Moshe writes, regarding the definition of something which is cooled substantially according to the Ramah, Rav Moshe writes that a food is considered cool once it's no longer fit for someone who would want to eat it hot. Right? Tama Ramah, shum soiver ledina karaba varashba dein boshel achar bishul. So the Ramah holds like the Rishonim that says there's no bishul after the initial bishul. Gam belach, not just with something dry, but even something moist. Abo machmirin can you stand the gamri? But the chumrah is when it's completely cold. Now, what is the shear of cold versus hot? Shear hachamimah, says Rav Moshe, shetzarch lios belach laramohu sheroi leechol le'elu shrotzim lechol chanim. Meaning, there are those of us who like hot soup. Right? If you're not hot soup, you're not going to eat it. So if it's cold, well, you're not going to eat that soup. That's what is considered. If you let it got that sonain, you cannot heat it up again. Here comes the Eglei Tal again. The Eglei Tal quotes the same explanation from the Mizchas Kohen, but he argues that the Ramah agrees with the Shulchan Aruch that we must adopt the stringent position that reheating cooked liquids is a malacha. However, cooking foods, which is already cooked to the point of machal ben rustoiv, a food has been cooked to 1/3, or heating liquids which are still somewhat hot, is forbidden only midrabanan. Earlier in the discussion, I'm reading the footnote. The Egleital argued at length that even those who prohibit further cooking food already at the stage of Michael ben Drustoy agree that it's only a rabbinic prohibition, who disagree with the Beis Yosef, who assumes the opposite. Most poskim, though, agree with the Beis Yosef that it's a problem to keep on cooking even after Michael ben Drustoy. Therefore, says the Egleital, we may rely on the lenient opinions that permit reheating cooked liquids when they have not cooled completely, as there is no question of a balacha midaraisa. Across our Ramalakel, the decision of the Ramah to be lenient, below nitztan in legamri, when it's not completely cold. That's number one, according to the poskim that don't differentiate between something solid versus moist. He says that the when it's an Isser Deraisa, that's when they're machmir, but the Shalon is not in Lagamre. But if it had not cooled off completely, and some people were going to eat it based on that temperature, then we're not Isser Deraisa anymore. The logoramim is bashal kamaychel ben. It's not worse than if it was cooked 1/3. The davar yavesh, even though it hasn't been cooked completely. The shuv ain't bo mishum bishul midraisa. There clearly is no bishul midraisa. Rabbanan samchinan ala poskim below machakin bein lach liyavesh v'kulanin bishul achar bishul. So whether it's moist or not moist, dry only, there's no bishul achar bishul.
Are there 3 categories? Dry, moist, and liquid?
No, I think lach means liquid.
Liquid, okay, so then where the Egleital comes out is that you can reheat any dry food as long as it was heated once to Michael ben Rusay, and you can reheat even liquids as long as it's not completely cool. Anyone who wanted it warm would drink it.
But usually we're not leaving our food at room temperature. We put it in the refrigerator.
Then you can't reheat liquids.
So that's
Yeah,
and you remember in the letters with Rabbi Soloveitchik,
yeah.
he talked about it. It seemed like there was a family minhag to be makel by that. Not by the caterers and Maimonides. He made a
Right, I
distinction.
remember.
But okay. Now we're going to get a summary now. The Orcha Shabbos is a current person who's malakate all the different shitas. And he's going to summarize the halachos of reheating cooked food according to the Ramah for us Ashkenaz. Af Michael Shizbashal Kfar Kashir Michael Medrusoy. So, like Yaakov said, we're talking about a food that's been partially cooked up to 1/3. Kol Shadailon is Bashal Gamre. It hasn't been cooked fully. So, Asr Lahosif Bo Bishul. So, you can't add Bishul. Ava Michael Shnizbashal Kol Tzarcho. Something's been fully cooked. V'roy Lagamre Lachila. And it can be fully eaten. Ein bo iser bishul. So then there's no bishul anymore. Afim tosefes abishul mashbicha also. V'hu begeder mitztamik v'yafelo. Some foods get better even when you overcook it. So what he's saying is that even when the food is fully cooked and cooking it longer might make it tastier for some people, that's still not a problem. That doesn't make it a problem of bishul achar bishul. V'lachen yesh li zar b'kdeira. You have a dish that you're cooking, it hasn't fully cooked. Number one, you shouldn't move such a dish close to the fire, and you shouldn't cover it. Those 2 actions will hasten their cooking. You can't do that on Shabbos. A pot's been on the fire with food in it, and it hasn't been fully cooked, and you've removed it from the fire. You can't return it to the fire. Afilu eish gruf of a katuma, which means a blech, means even if this is a fire that's covered. Machmas Isser Bishul. So food that hasn't been fully cooked, that you take off the fire, you can't even put it back on a blech. But the food's been completely cooked. Mutter lohosif al gabok kisui. You can add a cover to it, ba'ofen she'ein bo isser hatmana, but you can't like pile pillows on it. We're going to see there's one of the malachos called hatmana is like burying it in the dirt because that adds heat. So just covering it, right, which is not going to be a problem of insulating, that you'd be allowed to do. And it's also mutter ola kaver la'esh. You can move it close to the fire. But often she'ein isser chazara, as long as you haven't violated chazara. Lachen roy lahakpid lechatchila. So it's important lechatchila to make sure that before Shabbos, so you kol ha'macholim mavushalim kol tzarchon erev Shabbos. If you cooked all your food, so it's completely cooked, erev Shabbos, already you've removed most of the problem. K'dei shlo yavo likashel be'isser bushel. Otherwise, you can fall into the trap of doing bishul because your dish hasn't been fully cooked. Michael Yovish, she's bashul like a kugel, or a piece of meat that's not liquidy, that doesn't have gravy. Okay, Michael Yovish, she's bashul, it's been cooked fully. Ein bo isser bishul afilu nitzdaning. So even if it's cold, so this is what now we're talking about. It's in the refrigerator, but it's been cooked completely. So there's no bishul achar bishul here. Hovein bishul achar bishul. Achein muter litein Michael kazal gabi kederis Michael. So let's say you have a pot that's on the fire, so you can put this piece of meat on top of that pot. It's not a blech, but people do put it. For example, let's say they have a small. No, let's say they have a pot on a small flame that goes all Shabbos. There were people who, and then you put.
You can't do that.
No, then you put a. That's what he's talking about. Hoil vein bishlach lachen muter litein Michael kaze al gabi k'deres Michael. No, the pot is on a blech,
Right.
but I'm not sure it's necessarily on a blech.
Yes, it is.
O mechema ondim ala eish, right? You're talking about a pot that's on a fire, and you can put this piece of kugel or meat on top of that pot. You're not putting it on the fire. It's like a blech. There's no different than a
It's
blech.
like those water blechs.
Susie, if you have a pot on a fire, that's just as good as a blech on a fire.
Remember those? And then it started a fire here. So it's stopped.
Hoil vein bishlach lachen muter litein Michael kazal gabi k'deres Michael. O mechema ondim ala eish. He's talking about a tea kettle that's on the fire. So you can, like, for example, you have an urn you can put something on top of that urn.
Right, some
So-
people do.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about. And that's considered ala eish. Okay. V'afsha Michael atid lagil dargas hom sheyad selesbo. Now, if you leave that piece of meat long enough on that thing, it's going to reach yad selesbo, but that's not a problem. Because there's no bishul achar bishul. And this is the way of doing it that it's not a problem with chazar. But you notice it doesn't say liquid. So let's say you had a cold soup in the refrigerator. You can't heat that up. Now, even when we're dealing with a cooked food, mikol makom, im nasnu bo tavlim achar bishul. Now, let's say you added spices to it after you cooked it. Now heating it up again is going to is a problem. Yesh iser lachzor. You can't put it the way we just said on top of a tea kettle or something like that because because now what you're doing is you're cooking the spices. Lachein en litin garine humus hamachuna arbis lechimu malgabi amechem. You can't put chickpeas on an urn mishum shatavlim izbashel mikocha meish because the spices, I guess, in the chickpeas become heated and cooked. Okay.
I guess he assumes that the spices on chickpeas are added after the chickpeas are cooked.
I guess he's assuming that,
That's what I'm asking.
right? Because if it was there before,
It gets
then
cooked.
it's also cooked. Okay. Here comes Dover Lach. Hainu dover noisily, something that runs, right? She's bashel, it was fully cooked, but if it's stunning, you put it in the refrigerator. Yesh lahavchin bo ben shnei matzavim. So based on the Ramah, he's going to give us two cases. Imitztanin legamri, which I would say means you put it in the refrigerator. Also lechamim oshenis mach b'sisr bushel. So then you can't heat it up. The dover lach is a problem. Now, imlon itztanin legamri. Let's say you left it out. Let's say it left it at room temperature. So it's gotten cooled down. It's not itztanin legamri. Afshi itztanin ad she'ena yad soledes bo. Right? It's less than yad soledes bo. Mutar lechamim oshenis mishum sheba'ofen zeh nemer haklal she'en bishlach or bishl ap dover lach. So if you have something that's moist and it didn't put it in the refrigerator, so let's say it's room temperature, that you could put back on the blach or back on the urn or back on a pot that's on a fire. Din ze she'amarnu, this din that we said, she'im lo itztanin legamri, that it's not in the refrigerator, it's not completely cool, and we said ein bo iser bisrol, hu davka ba'ofen shadayin roi lo ochle machbos achom shenishar. People will eat it based on how its temperature. Hainu she'adam ha'unyan b'mashke cham, somebody likes the liquid to be warm. Shoysoy so b'toros chamim tzas. He'll drink it when it's a little warm. Aval mitztanin ad kidei kach shebnei adam einem roim oso kecham el kapoy shebalma. But if people who like things hot are seeing this as like lukewarm and they're not going to drink it, that's considered kitzoinin gomer v'asur lachzor l'chamim l'choladeos. Then you would not be able to put it back. So that's how he distinguishes between the hitztani. If it's still warm enough that you would drink it, then you could put it back. If not, you couldn't put it back. So it's not just refrigeration. Even if it was a room temperature, if it's dover lach, if it's moist, if it's liquid. Sfardim agree with most of these rulings, except for those concerning reheating liquids that are somewhat hot. Concerning this point, Sfardim follow the rule of Shulchan Aruch that any liquid whose temperatures drop below Yad Soledes Bo may not be reheated. So the Ashkenazim are a little bit more lenient regarding that. Although both Ashkenazim and Sfardim do not reheat liquids on Shabbos, based upon the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, some Yemenite Jews do reheat liquids. This is based upon the fact that the Rambam, whose rulings they often follow, does not differentiate between liquid and solid food in this regard. It should be pointed out that this leniency does not follow automatically from the view of the Rambam. As mentioned above, at least some instances, cooking liquids that have cooled down is prohibited rabbinically, even according to the Rambam. And furthermore, the Rambam writes elsewhere that one must not introduce heat to cold food on Shabbos by leaving it on a hot vessel. So we'll see what the Teimanim do, actually. Rav Eliezer Melamed, the Pninei Halacha, writes that since this is a legitimate practice, if a person who usually follows the more stringent views is a guest in a Yemenite home, he may eat even liquid food that was heated up on Shabbos.
So you can have soup on Shabbos lunch. I want to be invited to a Yemenite house. Yes.
Umivnei olei Teiman, yesh tam rabim shoanigin kedasa rabim, ufi zeh, im bishlu marak be'erev Shabbos, that means they cooked soup completely erev Shabbos, b'nichu b'makor, and they put it in the refrigerator. Mutar b'Shabbos, lo tziom mekarer, they take it out of the refrigerator, lanicha b'makom sheyuchal ischamem ad sheyirtach, they can put it to the place where it's becomes much more than Yad Soledes Bo. V'chein adin lagabe ritovim, other sauces, gravies, v'chol shar tavshil, and those. Okay, but that's an unusual.
So in my house, my mother, we always had soup on Shabbos lunch. She would put it in a thermos. We're talking a lot of years ago.
Thermos. So it didn't cool down. So it didn't cool down.
It didn't. It showed.
That's
she just
interesting.
took it in a thermos and poured it
Yeah.
into the pot. There's a solution. You don't have to be invited to a Yemenite house.
Kasher mina shenohei k'shulchan aruch haRamah. Let's say a typical Sephardi or an Ashkenazi that are following either Shulchan Aruch or the Ramah, that we've normally learned that we can't reheat liquids. Mitareach, but he's a guest. Eitzel Teimani shenoi karab. Mutar lo lechol min hamarak. Shotziam ha'areach me'hakarer v'chimamo. You can eat from it. This is shehoil v'hamareach nahak halachal pi menago. Mutar lechol yudi lechol lechatchila mitavshilo. So what would the Pninei Halacha say about a Jew who keeps gebrochts, but he comes to somebody who eats gebrochts on Pesach? L'chora, based on this, both are valid minhagim. You should be able to eat, but we know it's not so. Yaakov, people who don't eat gebrochs will not eat at our house. If-
No, Caleb, we're not a problem.
It's,
Well, that's clear. That's very clear that you can eat in someone's house so they can eat the broth.
I know.
Because even the people who don't eat the broths, on the 8th day, they eat the broths.
Right.
and the same kalim. It's not like they have.
Right.
It's not like they have 8-day kalim.
Oh, 7 days, we keep separate kalim for my kids.
I understand, but on the 8th day, everyone you eat from the
Yeah.
same kalim. So those kalim have been quote unquote traced up. And you use them next year. You don't kasher your kalim. They're Pesach
We
kalim.
just do it.
Go along.
But-
Right.
but-
No, but the logic would apply, right?
The logic would apply, but, so tell me, when you were reading that last sentence, I was gonna go even further. So if you go to a house of a Sephardi and they eat rice on Pesach, why can't you eat rice? He says, since there's following the halacha based on the accepted practice of his community.
So Abe, are you hearing all of this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You hear the
Yeah.
comments that we're dealing with what the Pnei Halacha just said, that since the Teimanim have a valid practice following the Rambam, if you're a guest there, you can eat the way they do it. So we're dealing now like with gebrochts, or Yaakov just mentioned about eating rice on Pesach.
If that's the.
Maybe it has to do with not insulting your host.
Correct. So how far does it go? If you're invited to a Sephardi and you've never eaten rice before on Pesach, it sounds like you'd be able to eat rice based on this halacha. But that's why they said on Pesach, mishnish.
Yeah.
That was the, because otherwise, I think they understood that you'd be able to eat it, and they want to be machmir on themselves. So that's the concept of mishnish.
Why can't you just be honest and just say, we don't eat that?
I don't think it has anything to do with not insulting your guest. I mean, that's a nice reason, but that's not what Halacha. The Halacha says if it's an accepted practice.
Period.
Your guest, you can accept that minute for that meal. It's a little strange, but okay. Yeah, okay. I'm not gonna argue with her.
Right. Well, I'm gonna send Doron Podlashek an email that the crowd is, once we learn this Pnei Halacha, what would Pnei Halacha say about those issues? Would he agree? Does it extend? How far does it extend? Although according to Shulchan Aruch, one may not reheat cooked liquid food. Some poskim write that the more lenient view can be relied on when there's a combination of other factors. Rav Ben Zion Abishol writes that if necessary, one may warm cooked food containing liquid and remove it from the heat source before it reaches the temperature of Yad Soledispo, in accordance with Rashi. And we need not be concerned that he will forget to remove it in time. The whole problem was you're going to leave it there, but if you take it away from before Yad Soledispo, then there's no bishul that's occurred to the liquid. You haven't cooked it. Od nir sheish lakel b'shas hatzorech. Lasim meichel im roitiv. We're talking about a food with gravy. Im bedata lotzia kodem shegia haroitiv l'shir sheyad soledispo. He has it on, you're going to put it on the blech with the idea that you're going to remove it before it reaches Yad Soledispo. The yesh litzarf bezet shitas Rashi. Shemuter laniach davar she'ein mevushal im daito lotzia kodem she'is bashal. Even putting something that is not fully cooked, Rashi learned, we quoted that Rashi last week, that if you put it on the heating element, the blech, but remove it before it becomes Yad Soledispo, that was okay. Normally we're choishish that the person's going to forget and leave it there. Right? The Chayshin Shema Yishkach lets me call Malcolm, B'nidan Didan, Sheish B'machlokes. We have shitas that are more lenient. Shariladasa Rambam ain bishalach or bishal feel b'davarlach. Yesh litzar b'zeh shitas Rashi lahakel b'shas hatzorach. Shas hatzorach would be, I guess, a sudas bar mitzvah. You have guests. There's a hefsid mamoin, or right. That's a shas hatzorach. On the other hand, the Mishnah Berurah implies that Ashkenazim may not place cold liquids close to the heat source and remove them before they become hot. So the Mishnah Berurah is not makel like the Or L'Tzion. In cases of great need, Rav Yosef El Yoshev allows Ashkenazim to be lenient as well. Hilchos Shabbos b'Shabbat, cited in the Dirshu edition of the Mishnah Berurah. Those of you who haven't seen the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, in the back of each little siman, they'll bring more, like the Mishnah Berurah died in 1933. So they'll bring Rav Moshe, and they'll bring Rav Elyashiv and Shlomo Zalman, the last 100-year poskim, if they argue with the Mishnah Berurah.
Great index value.
And an index that cites a lot of these things. Rav Ovadia Yosef rules that one may ask a non-Jew to reheat even liquid food. Dasha al yedei nochri muter lechamim, afilu tavshilach tzonin al plata chashmalit. Means you have a blech, this is an electronic blech, and you can ask a non-Jew to heat up the liquid. Shahoyel l'das Rambam v'Arashba v'Aran mutar, afilu al yedei Yisrael. They hold that they hold that there was not bishalach or bishul, like we've learned a few times. So, and since even a Jew can do it, now we are machmir because there are people who argue with these rishonim, the way the Shulchan Aruch paskin. But ayedei nochri mi avalek kisfeka d'Rabbanan ulakula. So, the subject of asking a Gentile to from Lachal Shabbos will be dealt with at length in a later volume. So, Amir la'akum, certainly like l'shem mitzvah, like in your shul, and you need someone to turn the air conditioning either on or off or whatever. So you're allowed to tell the goy to do that because that's l'shem mitzvah. There's a certain tzorech. It seems that the Abia Omer. Okay, let me just make the footnote that we didn't say on what we were talking about. Most poskim do not allow an Ashkenazi or Sephardi to ask a Yemenite to reheat liquids in their own home, though the issue is complex. See Yalkut Yosef concerning a Sephardi asking an Ashkenazi to reheat liquids cooled to less than yet, and the essay of Idels for further discussion. Okay, so that didn't really deal with our issue. Okay, so apparently Rav Ovadia says you can ask a non-Jew to do it. L'chorei doesn't say b'makom hefsid or b'makom mitzvah. He just asks. He says since it's a suffix to Rabbanon, so he can rule. It's a suffix. The whole thing is a suffix. Bishlach or bishul here. It's rabbinic and it's a suffix. We can go l'kula because when you have a suffix by rabbinic law, you can rule leniently.
And I assume that Rabbi Vajja's reference to an electronic hot plate is just agavorcha. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, it means any, it's the same thing. It's the
That's
same thing
the
as
same
a,
thing.
I
That was the question I assume.
I think it's the same thing, because in Israel, I think they have a lot of those. Similarly, Rav Ovadia Yosef permits leaving even cold cooked liquids on a hot plate, which is off, but will be later switched on by a timer. This is because we can rely on a combination of the view. Now, by the way, a lot of these halachas is for caterers, right? It's not necessarily for home. The caterers use some of these kulas. I don't know of householders who use. Most of us have a blech on a gas flame. Now, Susie, you have an electric,
That's not true. Most people have a plata.
Yeah.
which is electric.
Yeah, not a
Right.
gas one.
But you
just said-
could-
You mean it's separate, they
but-
put it in separate.
And I have
Yeah.
a timer on mine. That's what I.
A
So-
lot of people
meaning-
have timers. We
Meaning
just
it's
don't know-
off and then you turn it on.
Yeah, we just don't know, because they don't want fires. We just don't know how to use one.
Okay, and certainly the caterers use it as well. This is because we can rely on a combination of the view that permits reheating cooked liquids and the view that indirectly, so you're leaving the cooled liquid on the plata, and then the timer turns it on and it heats it up. We can rely on a combination of the view that permits reheating cooked liquids and the view that indirectly causing malacha, it's a grama, to be performed is permitted. You want to heat up a cooked dish that the majority of it is gravy, shehulach. So we said already, the Rambam, the Rashba, the Ran rule leniently, but then the Shulchan Aruch ruled like the poskim that were more machmir, Moran pasuk la'achmir. Since a machlokas in halacha leads to a suffix, So, but here the suffix dealt with the issue of bishul. Bishul is an issue of a deraisa. So when you ever have a suffix by an issue of deraisa, we have to go l'chumra. That's the principle that the Shulchan Aruch used, why he paskined the way he did. Aval michlal, suffix beplukta revusa lo nafka. So this was a dispute between the Rishonim. Ume'ata bigrama k'gon nidon didan. This is it's only a grama. It's only a passive act. Shenosin akdera platash shaya kvuya. The liquid food was put on the plata when it was cold. Vraklachmi came to Shabbat. Later on, it's turned down by a Shabbos clock. Kivan shledas rova poskim grama shari, afilu shelo b'mokum hefsid. So a grama is a permitted act on Shabbos even without financial loss. Havli sfeik sfeiko lakula. So you have two suffix, and therefore you can rule leniently. However, many Ashkenazi poskim forbid in both of these cases. In the first case, the Bir Halacha was the Mishnah Berurah writes that one may only ask. That means he's saying that the Ashkenazi poskim don't allow you to tell a non-Jew to heat it. The Bir Halacha writes that one may only ask a Gentile to reheat cold liquids on Shabbos in case of need. In case of need means like you have a chola or something, but otherwise it would be forbidden. This would be consistent with the regular principles of asking a Gentile to perform halacha, according to which it's only permitted when the prohibition is M'Rabanan, and it is for an important Shabbos need. In the second case, where we use the Shabbos clock, the Piskei Tshuva cites numerous authorities that do not permit reheating cold liquid food on a hot plate or other heat source on a timer that will turn on later. See Min Chasiyitzchak, the Be'er Moshe, Az Nidru, and the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa. They explain that even if there may be halachic basis for doing so, leniency in this case will lead to confusion and errors in other cases, which will cause people to violate either rabbinic or biblical prohibition of bishul. So Mikra did, it's okay. It's just Zerus. But we certainly, there are poskim, particularly the Sephardic poskims that permit. We will conclude this subsection by repeating that even in cases where in practice no prohibition of bishul achar bishul applies, Chazal instituted a number of rabbinic enactments that must be adhered to in order to eat food on Shabbos. And this will be discussed in detail in the next volume of Tzurba M'Rabanan, volume 18. Okay, well, certainly there are foods that are clearly solid. A piece of noodle kugel is a piece of solid food. Potato kugel, okay. A piece of meat, let's say a piece of chicken without gravy. Okay, that's a dover yovich. Now, you have soup, so that's clearly a liquid. You have hot tea. Okay. Many cooked foods, though, include both solid and liquid components.
Oh.
The Rosh Tur and Shulchan Aruch, quoted above, all write that reheating cooked food containing liquid is prohibited on Shabbos, clearly implying that reheating food containing any liquid element is prohibited. Rabbeinu Yerucham writes similarly, names Rabbeinu Yonah, although he adds the proviso that this is true as long as reheating the food improves it. Because of Rabbeinu Yonah, Kol Zeh She'amarnu Shemachzirin Davka She'yigim Bod Yom LaMichael Ben Drustoy, that when you can be, the issue of being choizer to the fire is only when it's reached the point of Michael Ben Drustoy on Erev Shabbos. Avalim lo higia lo yachzir, but if it's not gotten to that point, you're not allowed to put it back on the fire. Im notaf was removed. Afilu higia, and even if it reached complete cooking, or even if it reached Michael Ben Drustoy, im shab ba'oida biyado, if while he was holding it, ad shnitztani natafshel cooled down, asher lachzira, can't put it back. Im yesh bar rotev, if there was liquid. L'chol davar sheyesh bar rotev umitztamek v'yafalo, something that's liquid, and then you cook it, and it becomes tastier. B'hutzonin, and it was cold, and it was cold when you put it back on the fire. U'mitzdamek having mevashel gomer. So that's bishul. You're not allowed to do that. The Beis Yosef quotes Rabbeinu Yerucham differently, saying that this restriction applies only to cooked food which is mostly liquid, like soup. Rabbeinu Yerucham, the Chelik Gimel, B'Shem Harav Rabbeinu Yonah, the Kol Sherubo Rotev Mitzdamek V'Yafalo, and V'Hut Sonin, and it's cold, and Keshechzir Gabikir Mitzdamek Havim Vashel Gomer. So the Beis Yosef, the commentary on the Torah, was medayek in Rabbeinu Yonah that it's got to be majority liquid. Shulchan Aruch Harav rules, in accordance with the language of the Rosh Hashanah Torah, writing that the leniency to reheat cooked food applies only to completely dried food. Tavshil yavesh ein barotiv klal ein bo bishul achar bishul. In this bashal kvar, if it was cooked, cold tzarchav. Afil in its time, like I mean, if it got to be completely cold, you put it in the refrigerator. You can put the piece of kugel back on the blech. The Shulchan Aruch Harav might be understood to mean that it is forbidden to reheat every cooked dish which includes any moisture. However, Rav Avram Chaim Na'eh raises the possibility that a dish would be considered to have liquid only if it's moist enough that it would make something else moist when touching it. And therefore, if it's not that moist, it's not considered moist for this din. If it's only minimally moist, so that it doesn't have the ability to convey the moisture to another dish, he leaves it as a tzrachiyun. So there's a little biography of Rav Noah. Rav Moshe Feinstein references the lenient view that reheating cooked food is only prohibited on Shabbos when the majority is liquid. And he points out that the rationale for this is difficult to understand. If reheating cooked liquids constitutes bishul, this should be true even if only the minority of the food is liquid. For this reason, the Prima Godim writes that this view is based on the minority opinion that reheating cooked food is only considered bishul if the food improves while contracting. But that view is not, this view is not accepted as halacha. And the Igros Moshe explains, Ochel sheruba yovesh, food that is dry, umi utolach, and only a minority moist. Ha'im yesh lahachmir, do we have to be machmir sheyesh bishul achar bishul in this time like if it became cold? Answers Rav Moshe. Hinei lo muvan chiluk ben rov lach lemutelach. He doesn't understand why should there be a difference between if something is 51% lach versus 10% lach. Because whatever liquid there is going to get cooked if it was cold. So he has to explain. The berovhu mitztamik v'yafelo, uv'miyutu mitztamik v'ralo, means the majority of the food is getting better with the cooking, and the minority is getting worse. Shlachin yeis le'esor, so that's why it's prohibited. Given the rabbim pligi ala ramah or achayim, the cause of the dafka b'mitztamik v'yafelo yesh bishul achar bishul. People argue with the ramah. The ramah said that it's only when it's mitztamik v'yafelo that it's bishul achar bishul. But the Rav Moshe is pointing out that there are people who are choilek with him. So we have to be machmir. Rav Feinstein also points out a contradiction in the Prima Godim in this regard. He concludes that it might be acceptable to be lenient in extenuating circumstances. Avol be'eshel Avram, uv'simin b'mishpat zov, these are the two places the Prima Godim writes. Eino kamashmos b'Prima Godim. It doesn't come out like the Prima Godim, dila'el. Umatir b'miyut lach. And in those places, he is lenient regarding if it's less than 50% moist. Because maybe Meikar Adin, there is no bishul achar bishul by moist. Since the din was not clear, they were machmir. But in an emergency, you could be lenient. Rav David Ribiet writes that practically Ashkenazim may heat up solid food such as meatballs, chicken, or kugel if they do not contain too much moisture in the solid pieces. But not if there's an additional sauce or liquid served together with the solid. So we know that, like you could have meatballs that are not in sauce, okay? Or you have meatballs in sauce. That's the nafkamina. kugel is normally not in a liquid, right? And meats can be. You can have brisket that's in a liquid. And sometimes brisket is dry. A dover yavesh does not have to be totally dry in every sense. Even a moist food may be classified as a dover yavesh, as long as there's no significant accumulation of gravy or other liquid. For example, a cold roast chicken is considered dover yavesh, even though the surface of the chicken is often moist with gravy or juices. Similarly, meat and meatballs, vegetables, and other cooked or roasted foods are all classified as dover yavesh, even when moist. A food is classified as dover lach if it contains an accumulation of liquid. For example, meatballs in a sauce, chicken in soup, meat and gravy. Those are dover lach for practical purposes because of the accumulated liquid of which they are a part. It should be noted, I'm reading the footnote, that the Mishnah Berurah seems to write that one must remove all of the liquid from the dish to be considered a solid food. Indeed, many contemporary poskim do not allow reheating even small amounts of liquid that are distinct from the moisture on the solid food. However, if the amount of liquid is insignificant and one is not interested in them, it may be permitted to reheat the food. And he gives you the Piskei Teshuvos in 318 for a summary of the different categories. Rav Ovadia Yosef, based on the Beis Yosef quoted above, rules that cooked food containing only a minority of liquid may be reheated lechatchila. This is the practice of many Sfardim today. They only said bishul achar bishul, but marak itself. But tafshil with marak, they didn't say that. El b'tafshil sheruba marak v'roitev. Halavachi dino ki yovish. Otherwise, it's like a yovish. She'ein bo mishum bishul achar bishul. U'kamor shekosav Maran Beis Yosef b'shem Rabbeinu Yeruv. Okay. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that even thick liquids, such as ketchup, have the status of liquid regarding this halacha, since they only stay together inside a vessel. Umash nistapek, the ketchup, shemahu oichel mach. So people wanted to tell Rav Moshe that ketchup is a food. Excuse me, is a dover yavesh. I don't know. Machmas shehu av, because it's thick. Af sheniruk al yedei shvicha. It's thick even when you pour it. So he wants to say, because remember, when tumah in tumah laws, there's distinction between when something's a food or a liquid. But here, ela be'imu davar azav, it's sort of like oozes out, or a piece that just stands and is stuck together. Af below kli, hamamidan. What he's saying is ketchup in a bottle, but if you pour ketchup, it spreads like a liquid. So it's not a food like that stands up and it remains. Like ketchup will spread. That's basically what Moshe is saying.
You know, these halachas are relevant now when you go to take your food through the airport security. I once had
Yes.
I had tuna fish with me.
And they considered that liquid enough? Because it is a lot, you gotta pour liquid
They said
out.
If it takes the form of the container, in other words, if you pour it out and it's, two supervisors came before they let me take the egg salad onto the plane, and it was egg salad. If it spreads when you take it out, then it's considered a liquid according to TSA. So lahavdil, you see that these things are, they have other applications as well.
Correct.
Who would have thought about it?
Correct. However, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach holds that ketchup is considered closer to a solid, and one may place ketchup on top of a hot food on Shabbos. So there's nafkamina in this machlokes. See Ma'ora Shabbos, Rav Auerbach writes in a letter that he believes ketchup is treated like moisture that oozes from a solid cooked tomato, and the ketchup is therefore treated as a solid. The Ma'ora Shabbat reports that Rav Elyashiv agrees with that as well. It should be noted Rav Feinstein also permits placing ketchup on top of a hot potato for a different reason, which will be discussed in the next volume. Okay. See also Orchas Shabbos, who entertains the possibility that the dispute concerning ketchup specifically may stem from the poskim addressing ketchup with different consistency. Rav Auerbach and Rav Elyashiv may have referred to ketchup with a more solid consistency, while Rav Feinstein may have addressed ketchup with a more fluid consistency. Heinz ketchup. Heinz
is thicker than Heinz. There's no question.
Oh, okay.
So maybe one was Heinz, one was Heinz.
Versus
Okay.
Heinz.
Yeah,
No, in Israel, they don't have either.
yeah. It's just,
Yeah.
and also in
I
the
guess in
restaurant,
those
they often
days, like,
dilute
ketchup
it.
was a side dish.
It was a staple.
Okay, let's finish up.
All their steak.
By the way, next week, we're going to start volume 18. Okay, we're not going to do the encouragement, inspiration for Operation Iron Swords at this time. We'll do it later. Okay. Causing bones to soften. In some homes, it is common to include chicken bones in the cholent that cooks over Shabbos. So first of all, how many people put chicken in their cholent?
There was a time.
No.
You did,
He used to do that.
exactly, but not
Yeah.
this. I would say that's I would say that that's a minority.
But my mother-in-law who went.
Okay.
they helped it, so I helped
Typically,
her.
the bones continue to soften even after the primary food is fully cooked. The poskim discuss whether it is permitted to return the pot to the heat source or move it to a hotter position under these circumstances, which might be viewed as cooking the bones. See a certain site where Rav Yehuda Spitz recounts the original story of how the questioner wrote. A number of students in yeshiva in Israel took cholent from the yeshiva cholent pot on Friday night and discovered that chicken bones in the cholent were not yet totally cooked. And they were unsure whether they could return the pot back onto the fire, even when following the other rules of Chazara. They later sent their question to Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Moshe, who, as we will see, took opposing positions on the question. Rav Shlomo Zalman rules that for those who eat or chew the softened bones, which was more common in Eretz Yisrael, expediting this softening is considered cooking, is therefore prohibited. In a place where chewing the bones is common, moving the food to a hotter position may be problematic, even for those individuals who don't chew the bones themselves. Those people that don't normally eat lilosa tatzamos to chew on the bones, even after they're soft, to become makam in ba'osa ir yesh harbe anashim. If that city, there are a lot of people shekein ochlin osam umargishin b'zeh tam tov, and they feel that it's gotten to a better taste. Umiyuchad efshar shegam lehem aser, that even for the other people, lachzer sekter lifnei shatzamos tisrachu. So Rav Shlomo Zalman is machmer not to be able to return that pot to the fire.
So this is a city by city question. New York might have a different halacha than Los Angeles. Depends on whether in that city it's common to chew chicken bones. So that's interesting.
You know what they used to do? I think I even remember when father used to take a chicken bone, crack it with their teeth and suck the memory.
That I remember, but not true.
However, Rav Moshe Feinstein argues that bones are considered inedible, and he proves that even soft bones are not considered food. He therefore concludes that softening the bones is not bishul, it's not food, right? These soft bones, nobody was interested in them. Even if it becomes roy lachila, they're not food to be makabel tuma, only if they're with food. Mitam yad or shomer. Yad is like a handle to the food, or a shomer is like a peel over a fruit. V'abliya sheyesh eze inshi debonos. So some people suck it. Who kabona atzamos ba'alma shein kol zeh shem achila. He doesn't even consider that eating. Then they're not really anything. Mitzad metzitzas satam. They're like getting the flavor. Sheyesh batzamos. Av bedin yad b'shomer leka. It's not considered yad shomer regarding tuma. B'shvil metzitzas atam. Af Rav Yochanan. The soiver de yesh shomer lefachos. This is just a detail in tuma v'tahara. Machar shein atam be'ein. It doesn't have its own taste. Shlachein leka b'bishul zeh bishul dachim. Not considered food. In the next response, written to Rav Shlomo Zalman himself, Rav Moshe agrees that if most people in Eretz Yisrael do eat the softened bones, cooking there would be a malacha. Although he expresses some doubt as to whether this, in this case, he concludes that one should certainly follow Rav Shlomo Zalman in this regard, as he had a better knowledge of what was known in Eretz Yisrael. Interesting, Rav Spitz writes that the local norms surrounding whether soft chicken bones are typically eaten play a significant role in the rulings given by these two poskim. Rav Ovadia Yosef is quoted by his son, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, as agreeing that one need not be stringent about covering a pot of cooked food while it sits on the fire, even though there are softening bones within the dish, unless he specifically intends to soften the bones. Since one does not intend to cook the bones, and covering the pot in similar actions only indirectly causes the bones to soften, which is a grama, it's a psikresha de lo ichbas. Remember we talked about a psikresha, something that automatically is going to happen, but he doesn't, it's not like he cares. And it's a rabbinic prohibition, it's permitted. Most people don't eat chicken bones. And Veda is kavanah, the fact that he's increasing the heat to this, he's not really thinking about the bones. We're not worried about this. The bishul atzam is chashiv k'psikration lo ichbaslei. It's a davar she, he doesn't have kavanah. It's a psikration. It happens, but he doesn't care. The person cares about the food. Uve emes, the name it in the scene is kisla gabe kedera, returning a cover to a pot. Sheish b'sochel tafshel shlom yispashel kol tzorchel. It's not cooked fully. Ein asur lemishum grama. It's only a grama. K'demash melchur loshon harosh. V'atur mon shulchan aruch. V'meila avalei psik reisha lo ichbas lebi rabbanan. It's a psik reisha, right? You don't have kavana, and even though it's something that's automatically going to happen, you didn't really care that it happened, and it's the whole issue is a drabanan. Like what Saul said, somebody is not eating the marrow, because that would be a problem. If you're not normally eating the marrow, you can put a cover on a pot, and that's not a problem.
Does this apply to meat bones as well?
Meat bones don't soften.
They don't, like when you.
Not those big marrow bones. You can eat the marrow. That'll be a problem because there's marrow inside.
Bones soften.
No, but then you have the marrow inside that's cooking. So that might be problematic.
It's already cooked.
Okay. Very good. Volume 17. Almost 300 pages worth of halacha. So questions, comments, anybody? And also, so next week we'll start volume 18. Whoever needs volume 18, come on by anytime. Mario, you have yours, Mario?
Yes.
Abe, what about you?
I have them.
Okay, good. Okay,
Yep.
very good.
Everybody happy for.
Everybody have a Freilich Purim.
And you too.
You too.